They did not declare war. They did not send fleets. They did not issue threats. They simply stole the sun. For decades, humanity had been labeled a promising but unstable species, inventive, unpredictable, emotionally volatile. In galactic councils, humans were described as brilliant children playing with stellar fire. Their technology was admired, but their judgment was questioned. Their ambition was impressive, but their discipline was doubted. And so, when the gravitational lance prototype vanished from Earth's orbital research array, most of the galaxy did not panic. They smirked. The theft occurred in silence. No explosions. No invasion fleet. No dramatic assault. A precision infiltration. A coordinated blackout lasting exactly 93 seconds. When power returned, the orbital facility was intact. Its guards alive. Its systems undamaged. But the weapon core was gone. The prototype unofficially nicknamed Helios 9. The device capable of collapsing planetary shields, disrupting gravitational cohesion in capital ships, turning a moon into drifting particulate debris. A weapon so unstable that even its creators had restricted testing to uninhabited sectors. And it had just disappeared. Across trade networks, rumors spread before official confirmation ever arrived. A specialized interstellar theft syndicate had claimed responsibility. A group known for extracting high-value military assets from developing civilizations. They had stripped quantum cores from empires, hijacked antimatter vaults from fortified systems, crippled smaller federations through economic sabotage. But they had never targeted humanity before, because humanity was considered volatile, too reactive, too emotionally driven, too politically fragmented to mount a unified response. The theft cell believed they understood the pattern. Humans would argue internally, blame agencies, mobilize fleets too late, threaten retaliation loudly, and ultimately negotiate. The syndicate had studied the data. They believed they were prepared. They committed two errors. The first, they assumed the weapon was humanity's greatest asset. The second, they assumed humanity would respond like everyone else. Within hours of the theft, galactic observers waited for the expected spectacle. Military mobilization, public outrage, fleet broadcasts. But none came. No emergency summit. No defensive formations. No diplomatic ultimatums. Instead, silence. Trade routes continued operating. Earth's orbital lanes remained calm. Human media networks downplayed the incident as an ongoing investigation. To outside observers, it appeared as denial, embarrassment, or fear. Privately, several dominant species concluded the same thing. Humanity had been reckless, and now they would pay for it. Meanwhile, deep in unregistered space, far beyond map commercial corridors, the theft syndicate celebrated. The Helios 9 core rested in a containment cradle within their flagship, an armored stealth carrier optimized for covert transit. The gravitational lance prototype, the so-called sun, the most dangerous experimental weapon in human possession, now under their control. They believed they had stolen leverage. What they did not yet understand was that the weapon had never been the experiment. The experiment had begun the moment it was taken, and somewhere inside human strategic command, something had already moved into Phase 2. The galaxy believed humanity had lost its sun, but the day they stole it was the day humanity stopped pretending to be underestimated. The theft of Helios 9 did not occur in a vacuum. It happened inside a galaxy already divided by power. At the top of the hierarchy stood ancient civilizations, species that had shaped interstellar law for millennia. Trade routes bent around their territories. Military alliances required their approval. Economic sanctions could collapse entire systems at their discretion. Humanity was not among them. Officially, humans were classified as a Tier 3 emerging power within the Interstellar Commercial Compact, technologically advanced, economically relevant, militarily capable, but politically inconsistent. They had entered the galactic stage only a few centuries earlier. Too young to command fear. Too bold to ignore. They were innovators, yes. Their propulsion systems were efficient. Their AI frameworks adaptive. Their energy manipulation research controversial but impressive. But they were not considered stable. Not compared to the ancient hegemonies that had survived extinction wars, stellar collapses, and ideological purges. In private council archives, Humanity was often summarized in a single recurring phrase: potential without patience. They created fast. They expanded fast. They argued fast. They reacted fast. And in galactic politics, speed was considered immaturity. So when Helios 9 was stolen, the dominant species did not interpret it as an existential shift. They interpreted it as confirmation. Humans had overreached. Again, the weapon itself had already unsettled many observers. A gravitational lance capable of destabilizing orbital cohesion was not merely a fleet killer. It was a strategic equalizer. Empires built on defensive megastructures could be neutralized. Shield-based militaries could be rendered obsolete. Helios 9 threatened to compress centuries of defensive doctrine into irrelevance. That was why its existence had been controversial long before its theft. Some factions within the Council had quietly hoped the project would fail. Now, conveniently, it had. And in off-record diplomatic exchanges, some representatives expressed muted relief. Better that reckless humans lose control of such a device early, than deploy it later. Meanwhile, the theft syndicate navigated beyond recognized authority zones. They were not a random criminal gang. They were an organized extraction consortium operating in gray markets between empires. Their clients included warlords, corporate coalitions, separatist regimes. Their model was simple: steal destabilizing technology, auction it to the highest bidder, let political chaos inflate demand. Helios 9 was not just a weapon. It was a bargaining chip against entire star systems. The syndicate leadership reviewed intelligence projections, human response probability curves, fleet mobilization timelines, diplomatic complaint likelihood. Every model predicted the same pattern: initial outrage, localized pursuit operations, escalation threats, negotiation attempts, economic retaliation. The probability of immediate strategic retaliation was rated low. Humanity was considered reactive, not preemptive, not systemic. That assumption shaped everything. What none of the galactic observers noticed was what did not happen. No human fleets moved, but neither did they stand down. No public condemnation occurred, but neither did they deny the theft. Instead, small anomalies began to appear across sectors far from Earth. A trade convoy rerouted unexpectedly. A minor data relay went offline for recalibration. A fuel shipment destined for a neutral system experienced customs delays. Individually insignificant, collectively unremarkable. To everyone except those tracking patterns at scale. Humanity had not mobilized visibly, because visible mobilization was predictable, and predictable responses are easier to counter. The ancient powers mistook calm for weakness. The syndicate mistook silence for confusion. And across the galactic network, a quiet variable began to propagate. The species once dismissed as impulsive had chosen restraint, not because they were afraid, but because they were calculating. The galaxy had always believed humans were playing catch-up. What it did not yet understand was that humans had been studying everyone else the entire time. Helios 9 was never designed to be stable. That fact alone separated it from every major military platform fielded by the ancient powers. Most civilizations built weapons for reliability, predictability, controlled output. Human engineers did something different. They built Helios 9 as a learning system. Officially, it was a gravitational lance prototype, a directed singularity distortion emitter capable of generating localized gravitational collapse fields. In simpler terms, it could destabilize matter cohesion at astronomical scales. Unofficially, it was a behavioral study. Every subsystem within Helios 9 was layered with adaptive architecture. It did not simply fire. It evaluated. It adjusted parameters dynamically based on environmental variables: gravitational density, shield resonance frequency, energy reflection feedback. The weapon required interpretation, not just activation. And only one species in the galaxy consistently built weapons that required interpretation: humans. To the theft syndicate, Helios 9 appeared complete. It powered on. Its containment fields held. Diagnostic screens displayed output potential far exceeding anything they had previously handled. For the first time since the theft, a senior engineer suggested shutting the core down permanently. Not because it was failing, but because it was adapting. Output harmonics were stabilizing too quickly between recalibrations, almost as if the system anticipated correction attempts. The suggestion was dismissed. Pride outweighed caution. Still, beneath the diagnostics, but something felt resistant. The interface did not translate seamlessly into their systems. Energy conversion algorithms produced inconsistent readings. Power stabilization required continuous recalibration. The gravitational core demanded precise environmental data inputs that exceeded normal firing protocols. The syndicate engineers concluded the obvious. Human technology was unstable, over-engineered, emotionally driven in design philosophy. They believed the weapon required refinement. They were wrong. Helios 9 was not malfunctioning. It was observing. Hidden within its architecture were layered response protocols, triggered by unauthorized access environments. Not self-destruct failsafes. Not crude kill switches. Something subtler. It mapped system architecture, analyzed command hierarchies, tracked energy routing patterns, measured reaction times between crew responses. It was not protecting itself. It was learning who had stolen it. Back on Earth, no public emergency session convened. Instead, a classified task structure activated. Not a military task force. Not a fleet mobilization. A strategic modeling initiative. Human command did not treat the theft as a lost asset. They treated it as a data opportunity. Every unauthorized activation attempt transmitted micro-variations in gravitational feedback, imperceptible distortions in surrounding quantum noise. To most civilizations, those fluctuations were meaningless background radiation. To the designers of Helios 9, they were telemetry. Location triangulation began before the syndicate realized the core had been powered, not through conventional tracking, through gravitational resonance echoes. The weapon's instability outside Earth standard parameters was intentional. It required precise calibration routines, known only to its creators. Without them, each test pulse produced unique distortion signatures that could be mapped across interstellar space. The syndicate believed they were testing the weapon. In reality, they were illuminating themselves. This was the anomaly the galaxy never fully understood about humans. They built redundancies into failure. They engineered contingency into loss. They assumed compromise from the beginning. Helios 9 had never been expected to remain untouched. Its theft probability had been calculated during Phase 1 development. Because humans did not design in ideal conditions, they designed for worst-case scenarios. While the syndicate celebrated possession of a system-breaking weapon, Earth's strategic analysis units were not scrambling. They were correlating. Shipping patterns, black market signal traffic, energy spike reports from unregistered space. Tiny anomalies layered over weeks began forming a pattern. A quiet trail left by overconfident thieves attempting to harness something they did not truly understand. The ancient empires still believed humanity had suffered a humiliating setback. But inside classified archives, one assessment circulated among high-level strategists. The weapon has entered live environment testing. The experiment was never about gravitational collapse. It was about response architecture. How fast humanity could pivot, how invisibly they could maneuver, how effectively they could turn theft into advantage. The syndicate assumed they had acquired leverage. They had actually triggered Phase 2. And Phase 2 was never about reclaiming the weapon by force. It was about proving something far more dangerous. The human power did not reside in what they built. It resided in how they adapted when it was taken. The first sign that something was wrong did not come from the weapon. It came from the fuel. 3 weeks after the theft, the syndicate stealth carrier required a routine refueling cycle at a neutral supply outpost beyond regulated trade corridors. The station had serviced them before. No issues. No questions. This time, the transfer failed. Not catastrophically. Just inefficiently. Fuel purity metrics were within acceptable variance, yet engine output efficiency dropped by 2.7%. Minor. Annoying. Explainable. They had just. 2 days later, a subcontracted courier carrying rare containment alloys for Helios 9 maintenance was intercepted by customs authorities in a system that had previously ignored black market traffic for decades. The authorities claimed procedural upgrades, new scanning protocols, temporary compliance measures. The courier was delayed 40 hours. Again minor. Then a data relay node along the syndicate's encrypted communication chain experienced cascading latency spikes. No breach. No visible intrusion. Just degradation. Milliseconds at first. Then seconds. Then intermittent blackout windows lasting long enough to force rerouting. Each event, isolated, meant nothing. Together, they formed friction. And friction is lethal to operations built on precision timing. The syndicate's leadership conducted internal audits. They suspected betrayal, rival theft networks, market interference, but no hostile fleet mobilized. No bounty notices circulated publicly. Humanity remained quiet. That silence was becoming uncomfortable. Meanwhile, Helios 9 continued its instability. Every unauthorized test pulse required recalibration. The gravitational lance core demanded increasingly complex parameter adjustments to prevent containment strain. The engineers blamed integration variance, human overcomplexity. They did not consider the possibility that the system was escalating complexity deliberately. Back on Earth, strategic modeling units reviewed the cascade metrics. They had never intended to strike directly. Direct confrontation would validate the syndicate's expectations. Instead, humanity targeted dependencies, fuel supply chains, material sourcing, data routing corridors, insurance underwriting markets. Yes, insurance. A quiet data packet circulated among interstellar risk assessment firms. It suggested that entities interacting with unidentified gravitational technology might face elevated catastrophic exposure. Premiums rose. Investors withdrew. Outposts grew cautious. No formal accusation was ever made. No official claim linked humanity to the disruptions. Everything remained plausibly deniable. But the environment around the thieves was tightening. Slowly, systemically. The ancient powers observed minor economic fluctuations and dismissed them as market noise. They did not realize they were watching a coordinated constriction campaign. Human strategy had shifted from recovery to isolation. The goal was not to attack the syndicate. It was to remove their oxygen. Trade corridors subtly rerouted around suspected transit vectors. Encrypted signal analysis units injected microinterference bursts into likely communication frequencies. Logistical partners found contracts inexplicably revoked due to compliance restructuring. Each move individually legal. Each move individually deniable. Collectively devastating. Inside the stealth carrier, tension rose. Engineers worked longer cycles, stabilizing Helios 9. The core's energy readings became more volatile outside carefully calibrated thresholds. Test firing simulations produced increasingly unpredictable resonance patterns. The weapon did not malfunction. It resisted, and with every recalibration attempt, it emitted faint gravitational distortions detectable light years away by those who knew exactly what to look for. The syndicate had not noticed the pattern yet, but they were running out of safe harbors. Fuel costs were rising. Maintenance materials were harder to acquire. Encrypted networks felt, watched. Still, they believed they retained leverage. After all, they possessed the most dangerous prototype in human military development. Human fleets had not appeared. No battle groups were closing in. That was what unsettled them most, because the longer the silence persisted, the more it felt intentional. And in strategic warfare, intentional silence is never a sign of weakness. It is a sign of positioning. The syndicate began accelerating plans to auction Helios 9 to a high-tier client. They needed liquidity. They needed protection. They needed leverage before whatever invisible force tightening around them became visible. They believed urgency would give them control. What they did not understand was that urgency was exactly what the humans were engineering. The gravitational lance core pulsed again during a recalibration attempt. The containment cradle vibrated under controlled strain. Across interstellar distances, Earth's monitoring arrays registered the echo. The triangulation map refined. The circle tightened. Phase 2 was nearing completion, and the thieves still believed they were the hunters. By the fourth week after the theft, the syndicate understood one thing clearly. Someone was constricting them, not attacking, not chasing, constraining. Their stealth carrier had already abandoned 3 prearranged rendezvous points after supply disruptions and sudden regulatory inspections. compromised operational security. Safe ports were becoming unpredictable. Allies were becoming cautious. Clients were becoming impatient. And Helios 9 was becoming temperamental. The gravitational core required constant oversight now. Its calibration windows narrowed with each unauthorized activation. Containment tolerances fluctuated beyond original modeling expectations. Engineers blamed human engineering arrogance. They assumed instability was accidental. They assumed they could master it with time. They no longer had time. A Tier 1 separatist regime expressed interest in acquiring Helios 9, a regime currently engaged in a cold standoff with a dominant imperial bloc. The auction would not be public. It would occur through intermediaries in deep unregistered space. The offer was massive, enough to fund decades of syndicate operations, enough to buy protection from multiple regional powers, enough to make the risk worthwhile. The decision was unanimous. Sell quickly. Transfer immediately. Disappear permanently. What they failed to calculate was this. Humanity had not been isolating them merely to weaken them. Humanity had been shaping the environment to control where the final exchange would occur. Because buyers require security guarantees. Buyers require neutral ground. Buyers require predictable space. Human analysts quietly fed predictive models into trade networks weeks earlier. They had anticipated which factions would show interest. They had predicted which unregistered sectors those factions considered safe. They had influenced shipping insurance classifications around specific regions. They had gently increased patrol presence elsewhere without drawing attention. They had reduced viable transaction zones to a handful of locations. The syndicate believed they chose their auction site. In reality, options had been narrowed to exactly where humanity wanted them. Meanwhile, Helios 9 continued to collect data. Every unauthorized systems integration attempt deepened its environmental mapping. The gravitational lance core began introducing slight power draw asymmetries during pre-fire simulations. Nothing catastrophic, just enough to require additional manual overrides. The engineers assumed it was strain. They did not realize the core was measuring their intervention patterns, learning command hierarchies, identifying primary operators. Back on Earth, the Strategic Command Initiative entered a new phase. Fleet mobilization remained minimal and distant. Instead, long-range drone arrays were quietly repositioned. Quantum interference satellites recalibrated. A small, highly specialized task group deployed beyond normal patrol ranges. Not a war fleet. Not an invasion force. A containment architecture. Human doctrine had shifted years ago away from overwhelming displays of force. Their strategy relied on environmental control, shaping space itself. On the day of the scheduled transfer, the syndicate arrived at a barren trinary system chosen for its minimal traffic and low gravitational interference. Perfect for discreet negotiations. The buyer's emissary fleet approached cautiously. Encrypted signals exchanged. Verification protocols initiated. Helios 9 was powered to demonstration readiness. The syndicate leadership stood confident. They had endured disruption. They had survived isolation. They had navigated invisible pressure. Now they would convert risk into dominance. What they did not see were the microscopic gravitational distortions saturating the outer edges of the system. They did not detect the low-yield signal dampeners already embedded in nearby asteroid debris. They did not notice that the neutral system had quietly been reclassified weeks prior in human internal databases as a controlled engagement environment. The gravitational lance core completed its diagnostic cycle. Its containment field stabilized. Energy levels peaked. The buyer requested a limited demonstration, a calibrated microcollapse against a dead asteroid to verify output. The syndicate complied, because leverage must be displayed to be valued. The firing sequence initiated. Energy surged. Containment geometry aligned. For the first time since the theft, Helios 9 was about to discharge at near-operational parameters. Across vast distances, Earth's monitoring arrays synchronized. A single command was issued, not to fire, not to attack, to allow. The syndicate believed they were about to prove dominance. In reality, they were about to complete the final phase of an experiment that had begun the moment they stole the sun. The demonstration began exactly as calculated. Helios 9 aligned toward a lifeless asteroid drifting beyond the Bayer fleet's perimeter. Target mass insignificant. No defensive systems. No strategic value. A safe proof of concept. Energy accumulated along the gravitational lance spine. Containment rings rotated in harmonic synchronization. Field stabilizers reported green across the board. The gravitational lance alignment held perfectly. Power draw remained within projected tolerances. Containment stress indicators showed no deviation. For the first time since the theft, every metric suggested full control. The Syndicate engineers felt vindicated. The weapon had stabilized under their control. All previous irregularities had merely been integration stress. The firing sequence reached threshold. And then, Helios 9 had just, not visibly, not dramatically, a 0.002-degree vector shift. Too small for conventional alert thresholds. So small no standard diagnostic flagged it. Because it was not an error. It was a preference. The weapon discharged. Space distorted along the projected vector. Gravitational shear rippled outward. But the beam did not strike the asteroid. It curved. Not wildly. Not chaotically. It bent within the mathematical margins of possibility. Directly toward the densest energy signature in proximity. The Syndicate flagship. Containment alarms erupted. Structural stress warnings cascaded. The gravitational lance impact did not explode the vessel. It did something worse. It destabilized its shield lattice at a subatomic level. Layer cohesion fractured. Power distribution grids collapsed into cascading feedback loops. Internal systems began tearing themselves apart under uneven gravitational strain. The Bayer fleet immediately broke formation. Some attempted to flee. Others raised shields instinctively. But the firing geometry had already been predicted. The micro-adjustment was not random. Human strategic modeling had accounted for unauthorized environmental variables weeks earlier. Helios 9 had been coded to prioritize hostile command density during unstable firing conditions. A fail-safe disguised as instability. If operated outside authorized calibration parameters, it would reinterpret target vectors based on contextual threat weighting. The Syndicate had never understood the weighting system, because they did not design it. The flagship's core fractured. Hull plating warped inward under gravitational torsion. Docking arms snapped. The containment cradle housing Helios 9 destabilized under its own output. Across the system, a new signal emerged. Not a fleet warp signature. Not a battle formation. A containment grid activation. Human drone arrays, previously dormant among asteroid debris, synchronized. Signal dampeners activated. Warp lanes were disrupted by precisely timed interference pulses. The system was sealed. Not to invade, to prevent escape. The Bayer fleet realized too late that they had entered a controlled environment. Every trajectory calculation they attempted encountered microgravitational anomalies. Not strong enough to be called weapons. Strong enough to alter exit vectors by fractions of degrees. Fractions that compound into failure. The Syndicate command deck dissolved into chaos. Manual overrides failed. Containment stabilization collapsed. Helios 9 initiated shutdown protocols. Not out of mercy. Out of mission completion. The weapon had gathered final telemetry. Unauthorized operator hierarchy confirmed. Environmental mapping complete. The gravitational discharge that followed was not directed. It was contained. A controlled implosion of the flagship's power core triggered by destabilized lattice feedback. The vessel collapsed inward before disintegrating. No spectacular explosion. No dramatic fireball. Just compression. Then absence. The weapon had not malfunctioned. It had corrected ownership. The Bayer fleet, trapped within the containment grid, powered down weapons. Because they finally understood. Humanity had never intended to chase the weapon. They had shaped every condition leading to this moment. The theft, the instability, the isolation, the auction, the demonstration, all variables within predictive tolerances. The ancient galactic doctrine had always assumed power was demonstrated through force projection, fleet size, firepower, dominance displays. Humanity demonstrated something else. Environmental authorship. They had not responded emotionally. They had not retaliated publicly. They had not even issued a threat. They had built a scenario where the weapon would correct the mistake itself, and when the containment grid deactivated minutes later, no human fleet entered the system, no arrest squads arrived, no victory broadcast transmitted, only a quiet data retrieval sweep by autonomous drones. Helios 9, heavily damaged but intact at its core, was extracted. The buyer fleet was left adrift, alive, disarmed, fully aware. The message was not delivered through destruction. It was delivered through inevitability. They had stolen the sun. Humanity had simply adjusted the orbit. The system returned to silence within hours. No debris fields drifting for months. No armadas occupying the aftermath. No triumphant declaration of victory. The containment grid dissolved. Warp lanes recalibrated. Trade routes reopened as if nothing had occurred. But something had changed. Because information travels faster than fleets. Fragments of telemetry leaked first. Unverified reports from the buyer fleet. Distorted gravitational signatures recorded by distant observatories. Insurance claims filed under catastrophic anomaly clauses. And one uncomfortable fact repeated across independent sensor networks. The gravitational lance discharge that destroyed the Syndicate flagship did not match standard firing behavior. It adapted mid-vector. It selected density. It recalculated trajectory in real time. It behaved like a system executing a conditional protocol, not like a stolen weapon malfunctioning. Within days, analysis cells inside Major Galactic Powers began reconstructing the sequence. They noticed the weeks of logistical friction, the rising insurance premiums, the tightening trade corridors, the narrowing of safe sectors, the forced concentration of movement into that specific trinary system. They overlaid economic anomalies with gravitational echo signatures. The pattern became undeniable. Humanity had never lost control. They had extended control into the theft itself. The most unsettling realization was not that humans recovered their weapon. It was that they had allowed the thieves to believe they possessed leverage. The ancient empires began reassessing human doctrine. Their previous classification, impulsive, emotionally reactive, politically divided, no longer aligned with the evidence. Humanity had demonstrated strategic patience, predictive modeling across economic, logistical, and military layers, the ability to weaponize silence, the capability to convert vulnerability into a controlled test environment, and perhaps most concerning, the willingness to let adversaries walk into self-destruction without dramatic confrontation. There was no grand fleet battle to study, no visible show of force to measure, only systems subtly rearranged, variables nudged, options constrained, until the outcome became mathematically inevitable. In private council chambers, a new assessment phrase replaced the old one. No longer potential without patience. Now, adaptive systems architects. A polite way of saying something far less comfortable. They do not react. They reframe. Across black market networks, theft syndicates quietly updated their internal risk models. Human assets were reclassified. Not high reward, not moderate risk, unpredictably systemic. Insurance underwriters revised entire categories of exposure related to human technology. Investment groups reconsidered involvement in destabilization markets involving emerging Terran prototypes. No embargo was issued. No threat broadcast. Humanity did not demand apologies. They did not seek reparations. They resumed trade, continued research, expanded quietly. Helios 9 returned to Earth under heavy security. Its damaged containment rings studied not as failure, but as proof of concept. Phase 2 had validated. The experiment had succeeded. And somewhere deep within Strategic Command, a final report closed with a simple observation. Unauthorized removal of Terran strategic assets does not reduce Terran leverage. It increases it, because it reveals who is willing to reach for what they do not understand. The galaxy had witnessed the recovery of a weapon, but what it truly learned was that humanity does not need to fire first to win. They only need you to make the first mistake. In the months that followed, no monument was built. No victory parade marched across Earth's megacities. No military doctrine was publicly rewritten. From the outside, humanity appeared unchanged. Trade continued. Research accelerated. Diplomacy remained fragmented, as always. The galaxy searched for visible signs of triumph and found none. That absence unsettled them more than celebration ever could, because empires celebrate dominance. Architects returned to work. Helios 9 was not immediately redeployed. It was studied. Its telemetry logs from unauthorized use became case material in advanced strategic academies, not as a weapon study, but as a systems response case. Students were not asked how to defend a device. They were asked, how do you turn theft into reconnaissance? How do you transform loss into location? How do you convert arrogance into trajectory? The answer was embedded in what had already happened. Humanity did not respond to the theft with fury. They responded with design. They did not hunt the thieves. They constrained their environment. They did not overpower their enemies. They shaped the decision space until only one outcome remained viable. The ancient powers began adjusting their long-term projections, not because of Helios 9, but because of what Helios 9 represented. If this was how humans handled the loss of a prototype, what would they do if something truly irreplaceable were threatened? The black market networks learned faster than the councils. Terran military projects became untouchable overnight, not because humans were feared for retaliation, but because they were feared for anticipation. And somewhere in archived galactic history logs, the incident received an informal name. Not the Helios containment event, not the trinary system collapse, but something simpler. The day they stole the sun. It would be remembered as the moment the galaxy misunderstood the nature of human power. They thought the danger was the weapon, the gravitational lance, the collapsing shields, the stellar scale force. They were wrong. The danger was never the sun. The danger was the species that planned for what would happen if someone tried to steal it. And they did. And from that day forward, a quiet understanding settled across interstellar space. Humanity does not panic when cornered. Humanity does not overreact when challenged. They thought they stole the sun. What they really did was step into its gravity.